More than 50 million chess players have tried Nasty's color's checkmate trick, and today we're gonna see the top 5 examples when those tricksters got what they deserve. In the first game, Black played quite a smart move queen to e7, because in most cases Black actually counters this by going pawn g6, which is okay, but it turned out that queen e7 also covers this pawn, and it's kinda trickier. There are a couple reasons behind this move. One is, you can always go knight f6 and hit this queen with the knight, as well as this pawn on e4, and that can be unpleasant for white. The second idea is that after white played knight c3, trying for knight d5, putting pressure here, Black played knight d4, and that's also one of the good ways for Black to use the fact that this pawn on c2 is no longer defended, since the fact that white moved the queen away. Now, knight takes c2 would be a fork to the king and the rook, therefore that's quite an unpleasant threat for white to counter. However, in this game, white realized that they can go knight d5 and hunt for a bigger fish, the queen on e7. At first it looks like Black is somewhat in trouble, but Black found a brilliant counter, knight f6. They just counter the white's queen, so that white is taken here, Black is taken here, and Black also is ready to trade off knights. Now, white decided to trade queens. Black took here. After that, white took on c8. And here comes knight takes c2, which brings Black the winning material advantage. That is a check to the king, and after the king goes, Black can now grab the rook in the corner. And Black has already achieved winning advantage, but to make things worse for white, quite often white players try to get a bigger price for this knight, because they see that it's going to be captured, and they try to get at least something for this knight, so they capture on a7, which is yet another mistake, which makes it just completely lost for white, because after rook takes a7, now this rook is active along the a file, and if white tries to capture this knight in the corner by playing b3 followed by bishop b2, that fails because this rook is now active, can capture this pawn, and now Black is just a rook up in an endgame, and that's completely winning. The next game is so brutal that you're gonna enjoy it for sure. It reached the same position, however, unlike the previous game, white decided to stop this knight from jumping to d4 by playing knight to f3 themselves and taking control over the square. However, now Black goes knight f6, which hits the queen as well as this pawn on e4. And with this knight on f3, the queen has no way back, so it can't just go back somewhere to safety, and it has to stay right here, which is still not an ideal position for the queen, because Black can still possibly attack it in the future. However, Black here played a completely shocking move, pawn g5. They just went for this all-out attack straight away, and this g5 seems like a move which is something really difficult to understand. White can easily capture it either with a queen or a knight, but it turns out that in both cases Black has monstrous attack. For example, if queen captures, here comes rook g8. Black keeps gaining more and more temples, attacking this prematurely developed queen. And if the queen goes back, trying, let's say, to maintain this, Black could grab this pawn on g2, but in this case, even stronger is to go rook g4, hit the queen. After that, you can take on e4, hitting the king, as well as this bishop on c4, and that's a lot of fun, and Black's winning. It looks better for white to capture the pawn by the knight, because this also hits this pawn on f7, but Black responded with pawn d5, opening up the diagonal for this bishop, as well as hitting it right here. That's another pawn sack, but after white takes, now we go knight d4. It turns out that we actually deflected this knight from f3, and therefore it no longer guards the d4 square, so we could get to this juicy square, threatening knight takes c2, going after the king and rook. White tried to defend the pawn by going knight to a3, but here comes knight f5. Now we're going after the queen, and interestingly enough, it has almost no squares to go to, because all these squares are actually controlled by Black. So white has to go right here on h3, but now Black goes h6, getting one more tempo, the knight has to go, and now there is this unpleasant opposition of your bishop versus the queen, which means that anytime you want to, you can jump with your knight somewhere, exposing this discovered attack. But it's even stronger to play rook g8 first, putting the rook to this active position, which makes your further threats even stronger. For instance, like really, there is almost no way for white to stop you from jumping with this knight somewhere, hitting the queen. For instance, if they just castle, you then go knight d4, exposing this attack. The only square for the queen to go to would be queen to h4, but that fails to knight f3, and since the pawn is pinned, it can't take, means that on the next move you're going to also grab the queen and win the game. In the third example, Black decided to go for the counter-attack right out of the gate. After white played queen h5, hitting this pawn on e5, instead of defending it, Black just played knight f6, which attacks the queen and yes, sacrifices this pawn on e5. But the downside for white is that they keep running around with their queen, wasting time and ignoring development. So Black plays bishop e7, white played bishop c4, the standard move which they usually play in this color's checkmate pattern. Then Black gets one more tempo, attacking the queen, plus the queen wants to keep guarding this pawn, therefore they played right here, and now pawn d5 strikes in the center. Since we want to counterattack, we do want to open up files so that it's easier for us to start the actual counterattack. White naturally captured the pawn, but here comes knight b4. You already know this motif from previous games. Since this pawn is not defended by the queen from d1, it's always unpleasant for white when you start going after it, because it creates this fork to the king and rook. Now, white defended it with knight to a3, putting the knight to the ugly position, and black simply castled. And although black is currently down 2 pawns, but of course black will easily get one of them back on the next move, plus white is underdeveloped, and their queen is still exposed. This knight on a3 is ugly, which means that overall black has superior position and great chances for attack. Now, the thing that bothers white the most is this knight on b4 that's putting pressure. So they're trying to kick it off, but then you counterattack once again with bishop d6. You see that it's a common motif. Since the queen is exposed, it's natural for you to wish to gain tempos. Moreover, after white moved the queen here, black still did not move the knight away, but instead gained one more tempo by playing rook e8. And after that white covered, here comes the final surprise for white, and in this case this is a winning surprise, rook to e4. Strangely enough, the queen is captured right in the middle of the board. Black controls all these squares where the queen could possibly go to, and white is losing material. Moreover, after white decided to trade here, they are already lost material, but after queen h4, black kind of tried the same scholar's checkmate pattern against white, but in this case it's a lot more effective for black, because there is no easy way for white to cover it. Now queen takes f2 is a major threat, and white can castle because black is also keeping control over this square h2, so castling would be castling right into checkmate. We can't do that. And if they instead go g3, which they did in the game, black just went inside with queen h3 with a whole lot of threats. Queen g2 going after the rook, this pawn on f2, bishop takes b4 is coming, bishop g4 is coming, and that's a complete devastation. Before we move on to the next method, which is probably the best one, let me have a quick announcement that we are hiring a social media specialist, which means that you can join our team of Remote Chess Academy and work together with me. So if you think that you can be a good fit for this position, you can apply by clicking the link below the video in the description, or if you happen to know somebody who may be a good fit, then you may share it with them, and in case they're hired, you'll get a referral bonus of $250. Again, read all the details below. In this game, initially black played the standard move pawn g6, but after queen f3, which renews the threat, black played a shocking move pawn f5. And especially if you play the Russo gambit as black, then it's extremely satisfying that you can use something similar even against the scholar's checkmate. Now, initially it looks suicidal, like you completely open up your king, but in reality it's a pretty good move. After pawn takes, you then counter with knight e4, the move that we know that works in lots of these sub-variations. Now, it tries to go queen d5, hoping for this attack of queen to f7 checkmate or queen takes e5, so you cover that by going queen e7. Now, white's attack has stopped, and now they have to parry knight takes c to the threat, so they go knight a3. You then play knight f6, as usual, gaining more tempos for your development. Now, the only square for the queen to go to is queen a5, then you keep chasing it with pawn b6. Once again, they're forced to go here, and now you can simply capture the pawn back. There are other ways as well, but this is the simplest one. And here's what happens. Let's say they develop and you go bishop b7. What happens is that you completely shut it down the white's attacking attempt. Now they are undeveloped, disorganized, this knight is on the edge, the queen keeps running around and it's being attacked always. You can go knight e4 and attack it once more. You're putting a lot of pressure down here, and your knight on d4 is annoying. You can play d5 in the future and attack this bishop on c4. You can go rook g8 in the future and hit this pawn on g2. You can castle queenside and you have finished your development. Basically, all these threats just make your position completely winning. Moreover, they can't even get rid of this annoying knight that is putting pressure down here, because if they try to trade, there's another unpleasant surprise. This not only attacks the queen, but that is actually a discovered check, which means that they're simply gonna lose their queen on the next move. There is also a way that stronger players use to try this color's checkmate trick. They usually play a bishop c4 first, and then they bring their queen out not to h5, but to f3, to the square that is not that advanced, and therefore they still create this checkmating threat, but they don't expose their queen as much. So how do you deal with that? In fact, the fun fact is, even Magnus Carlsen has once tried this color's checkmate trick against somebody rated 600 points below him, so he thought that probably he could win anyhow, but at the end it didn't really work for him. So, after queen to f3, black still plays queen e7. Now this pawn is defended and knight to d4 is coming. White tried to stop it by going c3, and guess what? We still played the Russo gambit no matter what. Black played pawn to f5. Again, looks very surprising at first, because white can take it either with a pawn or a queen. Queen takes f5 is a very standard trap for white to fall for, because then you play d5, which not only hits the bishop, but it's also a discovered attack of the queen, which they often overlook and just blunder the queen. Even if they don't blunder it, at least you're going to grab the bishop. Now, if they don't take by the queen, but grab it with a pawn, that's still okay, because you then play knight f6, and you have all kinds of threats to expand in the center of the board. The white tried to stop it by going d3, but black once again just sacked the pawn on d5. You see that since white is running around with a queen, it makes sense for black to even sack a pawn or two, but quickly finish his development and rush into the counterattack. So d5 hits the bishop, white decided to take there, and after this exchange, here comes bishop takes f5. Now we're threatening all kinds of rook d8 things. For example, in the game white played knight f3, and black indeed played rook to d8, hitting the queen. White played queen b5, trying to counterattack, but black still played bishop takes d3, which attacks the queen, and also it cuts the white king off, therefore it can't castle anymore, which is nice. Queen takes b7, it hits the knight on c6, and black played queen d6, and that actually already is a completely winning position for black for a number of reasons. Once again, the king cannot castle. You can go e4 at some point and drive away this knight. Your queen and the rook are forming a battery along the d-file, and if you move the bishop away, some queen d1 checkmate may be coming. Also, queen can be rerouted to g6, where it can hit the pawn on g2, or it can go queen e4 and try to checkmate white. And in the game, white played bishop g5, trying to develop a bishop and counterattack, but after rook b8, it turned out that the queen on b7 is simply captured and lost.